I'll pick it up from here and walk you down the path of commercialization. So we'll do it in two pieces. One is think about the technology as the type of technology, what stage it is at, so you can understand for different types of technology what is the path to market. And then think about the licensing strategy and what are the tactics to get that partnered and licensed. Okay? So when you think of your technology, you think of it from a marketplace, whether it's a therapeutic, so a pharmaceutical, is it a medical device or a diagnostic? And then you try to think, as you're defining a value proposition and you're thinking about partnering it, what stage are you at for that technology? So for a therapeutic, when you're thinking about stage, typical questions are, have you identified a pathway? Have you identified the target? Is your target validated? Do you know mechanism of action, how it works, like you drew on the board? Do you have any potential drug candidates, an antibody, small molecules, right? If it's a medical device, a good stage check is, do you have a rough working prototype? Have you shown it in an animal model? It depends on the device. And for diagnostic, what's your validation data look like? Is it from in vitro experiments in cell lines? Is it in an animal model? Or do you have the information from patient data? And all these factors, understanding whether your technology is a pharmaceutical, is a medical device, is a diagnostic, what stage it is, influences how you're going to partner, with whom you're going to partner, how easy is it going to be partner, and what's the value proposition that you're bringing to the table to that partner. So let's think about simple timeline and cost for each of these categories. So therapeutics, we all know, is something that takes over 15 years and close to $1 billion. Medical device, it depends on the class of device, and so there's a huge range. It's roughly 5 to 10 years and could range from $10 to $30 million. Again, depending on whether you're going through a device that needs PMA, if it's a therapeutic device or not. Diagnostic, again, it depends because of the range of diagnostic technologies, and they are 1 to 5 years, and then again can range from as little as $1 million to $30 million. So these are just historically categories to give you a sense for what the path to market looks like for the partner that's going to take on your technology. So let's go a little deeper dive into therapeutic. Right? So if you think from value proposition or de-risking, value inflection points for a therapeutic, at the minimal that you have some animal data. What's really nice is if you are a few years away to an IND. So if you are a partner and you're doing a value proposition and trying to bring to the table, the partner's weighing the time to market. If you are a existing pharmaceutical company for a therapeutic, you know it's 10 to 12 years to get it to market. If you're a small startup company thinking what's your inflection point at where you will exit, minimum 5 years you're looking at. Same if you are a small startup company, you're thinking your exit is going to require, if you're going to raise money, close to $100 million if you want to get to an inflection point and exit. And typically for therapeutics, the ones that are blockbusters, you want large market size. That gets you your most value inflection value proposition. What are the biggest risks for therapeutic? Clinical trials. What kind of therapeutic is it? What's the design of trial going to be? How much is it going to cost? Is it a longitudinal study that's going to take a long time? Are there even good endpoints? How will FDA view it? So regulatory and clinical trial is the biggest challenge for therapeutics from a value proposition. About still 50% drugs fail at phase 3. You know, it's an expensive proposition. So let's think about devices. Value inflection point for device, again, very dependent on the device, but a working prototype, some evidence that the device works in an animal model, or depending on the device, if there's technical and user data, that would help. Again, when you're balancing risk and value proposition here, So if you're an existing company, you know you're going to spend, depending on the device, 2 to 5 years to get to market. If you're a startup company, typical models are trying to get to revenue before you exit. And for a startup company, exits are you either go IPO or you get purchased by a company, larger company. So the risk for a device is, as John pointed out, adoption. And also because a lot of times, even though you don't need full clinical trial maybe for the device, you still need to show some clinical data to convince adoption, clinicians who will have to use the device. You need to have something to bring quick adoption. The other big challenge is reimbursement. If you have to get a new code for that device, it's after regulatory approval and can take almost 2 years to do that. And that leads to slower adoption, because if it's not going to be reimbursed, there's going to be less adoption, and there comes competition, and you've reduced your success rate. So for diagnostic, again, the value inflection point is some prospective data and analysis from patient samples. So balancing that, time to market can vary from 2 to 8 years. The investment is somewhat in between, though currently FDA regulation is becoming very high for diagnostics, and it's becoming challenging. And the risk, again, are reimbursement and adoption, because in diagnostic, really, you have to ask, is it going to change decision making by the clinician? Is it going by your doctor? Is it going to change how therapy is administered? Is it really neat to have or nice to have in terms of reimbursement and adoption? Okay. So that's when you're thinking from what type of technology you have, what's the path to market look like. So when you've synthesized all this, you're trying to, as an academic technology, I'll go with the typical case. We're typically early stage technologies, and we're not quite de-risked. So one of the key questions when you're thinking about license strategy, you're also trying to understand, is the technology a platform technology? So I'll get to it. Platform is when the technology is not just a one solution for one specific disease indication. For the example you shared with us, it was definitely for one specific disease. But there could be new classes of genome editing tools, which could be for multiple diseases. So that's a platform technology. So typically, when John and I get a technology, we work with the investigator to understand the unmet need, the solution that the technology is providing, how to articulate that value proposition, understand which category it fits in, what the path to market looks like, what are the players in that field, what are the companies, and we always consider both options for the technology. So does all that synthesized together make it fit as a good licensing strategy to license to a existing company, or to form a startup around it? So let's take an example. I work in regenerative medicine, so it's always easier for me to think of examples that come from that field. So here is an example. So new method of making induced pluripotent stem cells. I think timing plays a big role. If this discovery and this technology, you came to us in 2007, 8, and 9, there weren't many companies working with induced pluripotent stem cells, because nobody besides academicians knew how to make iPS cells. It had a lot of promise, but there was not a expertise resident in the pharma companies, etc. So it was actually would lend itself to being a platform, a brand new way of doing something that would apply as a promise to solve so many diseases. So one way was to develop that platform by forming a NewCo that would spend time on technology development, right, and build models where that could first be used as research tools, generate some revenue, pumped back in to understand more and how to apply it as cell therapy or later on. But today, if maybe you had a new method for making iPS cells, the questions I'd ask is it incremental to the existing ways that people make IPS? Is it making it better, or being able to do quality check for, is that iPS cell a good iPS cell with potential to differentiate into many cell types? And there are many companies that are using iPS cells, so we might license it to one of the companies that might be interested in improving their process and using our technology. And again, this brings up a very important point. You have to think about your licensing strategy as to your partnering it for what application. So you can license iPS cells maybe to more than one company. So that's a non-exclusive licensing strategy. There are 4 or 5 companies making induced pluripotent stem cells. You might license your technology to all of them. Or you might choose to do, with startups very often it's exclusive because they need that for their business value proposition. Also, it can be field limited. Maybe you would license it to a few companies that make research tools, but you would license it exclusively, more likely, to a company that wants to pursue a therapeutic application for cell therapy. Right? So you could also divide up your partnering licensing strategy by field. So here's another example. Again, so long non-coding RNA. There was a whole new class of gene expression modulators. Right? So when you make that discovery, right, again, classic example of a platform. Is it early stage? Yes. Is it de-risked? No. We don't even know if these will actually translate into being druggable therapeutic targets and how efficacious, how to get the oligos. But again, it's an example of a brand new class of targets. And again, the answer there, because of that, it's probably needs a lot of technology development, value creation, and to form a startup company probably be a more appropriate answer.